You didn't get to where you are by playing small. You got here by outworking, outthinking, and outleading the room. But the higher you climb, the harder the questions get, and nobody hands you a playbook for this level. Welcome to Full Strength Leader, the podcast for executives, high performers, and leaders who refuse to coast, with surface-level leadership advice and ready to do the real work. Hi, I'm Kabrina Ashley, applied neuroscience practitioner and leadership consultant, and this is where I bring you the intersection of science and strategy and where real leadership gets built. Every episode, I bring you the research, the real talk, and the frameworks you need to lead at your absolute best, even when things feel upside down and on fire. Because half-strength leadership isn't an option. This is Full Strength Leader. Visibility is not recognition. Most leaders have mastered recognition without ever practicing the harder skill, really seeing the person in front of them. Welcome to Full Strength Leader. I'm Kabrina Ashley, applied neuroscience practitioner and leadership trainer. This episode is part of the Seeing People series, and today we are starting with the research that made me realize most of what we call management development is teaching the wrong skills. There's a manager I worked with who could tell you every one of her direct reports' performance scores going back 3 years. She had their strengths profiles memorized. She knew exactly who was on track and who was behind. And when I asked one of her team members to describe how they felt at work, they said, "I feel like a resource, not a person." So hear that word, a resource. Gallup has been tracking what separates the best managers from everyone else for decades. They have surveyed more than 35 million employees, and the single biggest variable in whether someone is engaged at work is not the company, not the compensation, and not the mission. It is whether their manager really knows them. And if we think about this from the idea of people development, people want to be seen and heard. They want to be known. That's how we keep our best people, our high performers, and the leaders that we want in place so that we can be the most productive that we can be. We focus so much on productivity that we miss the people that are producing the product or the service that we're trying to sell. The Gallup finding is staggering when you sit with it. 70% of the variance in team engagement comes down to the manager. It's not the organization and it's not the strategy. It's the manager that we have in place. That means the person who runs your Tuesday team meeting holds more influence over whether your people show up or check out than anything your executive team decides in a boardroom. And that's something big that we should be having big conversations about. Because a lot of times I see companies put people into leadership because they've been there a long time. They're the loud person in the room. They seem like they have all of the leadership qualities that we tend to look for: big, bravado, talkative, putting their opinion out there, coming up with strategies. But they're not the people that we're seeing actually lead well when it comes to the team dynamic. But here's where it gets interesting. When Gallup digs into what the best managers actually do differently, it's not their one-on-ones or their meeting cadence. It is their ability to know the individual person sitting across from them, not their performance data, them. This really comes down to, do we know our people and do we understand them? Do we understand the things going on in their life, the things that make them tick? Because when we start to understand some of those things, we can actually have people be more productive because we understand how to work with them versus just saying, this is a warm body and they were going to do X, Y, and Z within my performance because these are the credentials that they have off of a piece of paper. I think a lot of times we have, even pre-AI, have been hiring people and putting people into positions based on very surface data. We're seeing things like, this is what job that they've been in, these are the kinds of experiences they have, and we don't take into consideration a lot of those things that don't end up on a resume and don't end up in those performance reviews is the things that they do on the side, the kinds of experiences that they have, the kinds of knowledge that is outside of what data we're collecting. And that's where this recognition comes in. Recognition is what you give after someone performs, but seeing someone and seeing them is what you give before they ever perform. So recognition is great because that helps us understand where people are and recognizing what they've done. But to truly see someone, we have to do that ahead of time. We have to say, hey, I'm interested in you enough to ask the right questions to get answers that I might not get if I'm just trying to recognize you for the work that you've already done or that you're going to do for me. So, what does seeing your people really mean? How do we see our people? And how do we go about doing this in a way that doesn't feel heavy for managers and adding another to do list for them when we're trying to train in leadership? And so this is where we go back to some of George Land's studies that he did for NASA on creativity, which followed 1,600 children from age 5 through adulthood. And this was measuring one thing. It's the ability to see problems from multiple angles and to look past the obvious answers and find the less obvious, better ones. And I just want to stop for a second and talk about that because a lot of people, this is a very positive psychology standpoint, is that we live in this binary. It is yes or no, good or bad. And so we only have these two answers. And one of the things that I love about positive psychology is that we talk about how there's multiple different places for people to find answers. I like to think about it, and how I coach it is most of the time, we have two paths that we can see, but there's this giant cloud, there's this fog over these other paths. And I always talk to people about how we have to blow away the fog that's over these other paths and see if there's another way to solve a problem, to create a relationship, to go from point A to point B. And many times there is multiple of those extra paths that are covered by that fog. And now we have to use deductive logic and go, okay, what are the things that are our goals? Do these fall into those goals? And are these possible? This is one of the things that I love training people how to use AI on is, okay, what are the things within this that I'm not seeing? Because based on how we grew up, how we operate, the kinds of things that we have experiences in, we're going to be biased towards something. So asking other people, third parties like AI, of what are things that I'm not seeing? What are paths that maybe are there that I'm not aware of? This gives us the ability to now make better decisions faster because of the fact that we have more information. And the more information we have, the better we can do. But what the study found is that at age 5, 98% of those children that they were following scored in the genius range. So, thinking about the fact that 98% of people start out as geniuses at age 5, that's what they're scoring. But by age 15, that number had dropped to 12%. So, why is that? Why are these things dropping so quickly? And then by adulthood, it was 2%. Think about that. 98%, we were in that, okay, hey, we are geniuses. And now by adulthood, we're at 2%. And so Land's conclusion was that the education process itself was teaching children to stop seeing. We trained the creativity out of them by rewarding the correct answer over the curious question. Because questions take more time. Questions have to be answered. And it feels like when people ask questions that they're slowing down the process. When really, when we let and allow our people to ask questions and we convince ourselves that questions are a good thing, that's when we start to see better progress. This is where we see a lot of innovation. I know this word creativity tends to trip up a lot of people within leadership and within corporate settings because we go, oh, creatives. I hear all the time how people are like, well, I have to herd in my creatives. It's like herding cats. We've all heard somebody say something like that. But here's the thing, innovation and creativity live on the same spectrum. So when we're talking about this, now we have to go, okay, I want more innovation. I want people to be thinking about things. I want people to be using AI for more um, tasks and to get more done and all of these things. But then we've taken the initiative and the habit of asking questions out of the vocabulary of people. And now we're asking them to ask questions so that they can use some of these new systems, so that they can do their work better, and they can see some of those paths that we were just talking about that are not those binary A or B paths that we tend to see. But here's the thing about leaders. Leaders do the same thing to the people on their teams. They're telling them not to ask those questions. They're trying to get them to that next step. And we reward performance and we train ourselves to see role, not person, title instead of human, and output instead of potential. And so there can be people on your team that are the hidden gems that are waiting to be seen. They're waiting to be discovered, but it's asking the right questions as the leader to your team, but also letting your team ask questions because this is going to cultivate the ability for more questions to be asked. And you cannot develop someone you have never truly looked at. There's a framework I use in my coaching and training work called the Spark Method. It is not about big dramatic leadership moments. It is about the small, consistent actions that build the kind of relational equity that makes people really stay and grow. And if we're going to go over a couple of these right now, it's show up consistently, not just when there is an agenda. Being known that you're going to be the one who shows up, whether you're listening to this and you're the leader in the room, or you're the employee who's trying to get into leadership, or the high performer who's trying to get into leadership, showing up consistently. This is who I am. This is what I stand for. This is what I do. And when you get those pushbacks, especially with those questions, saying, I'm still going to show up. I'm still going to ask these questions. And you're going to have some people that don't like that. And being able, as leadership, listening to this, being able to say, no, this is what we want. This is what we want to see from people. The next one is pay attention to the person, not the role. So, who is the person? Do they have hobbies outside of work that actually help them do better in their job? Are they learning lessons from raising kids, having parents that they're taking care of, doing their own reading and research outside of work that they're interested in, that they are already doing that will help them within the job? We don't know those things unless we ask those questions, asking great questions like, what books have you read recently? What are you working on outside of work? What are things that are interesting to you? What news stories have you seen that have sparked your interest? There's lots of these different things that don't have to be political, don't have to be about what side is on what side. We can, even with this idea of news stories, recently the Met Gala happened, and Katy Perry was not at the Met Gala last year. But this year, she decided that she was going to wear a glove with 6 fingers because of the fact that some of those AI images that were being shared of her when she was not there had that weird hand thing going on that we saw with AI until fairly recently. So these are interesting things of like, can we get deeper into what people are already interested in so that we can ask them questions about who they are? But then this also allows me as the leader and as the trainer to go, oh, that's really interesting that you're interested in that specific thing, because I can now relate something that I need you to do back to that thing that you're interested in. So now a boring task, something that people would normally just write you off for, I can relate back to something that that person is interested in. And now there, even though it's still a boring task, there's a little bit more buy-in to accomplish that task to get us all towards our goals. Next is ask one real question deeper. Think about the ideas that you have and what are the things that we can ask deeper. I use this when I'm writing copy, when I'm teaching people how to ask deeper questions. It's this idea of so what? And thinking in your mind, we're not going to look at somebody and say, so what? Because that can come off very rude. We're going to think to ourselves, so what does this thing that they just told me mean? Is there something beyond this? And if there is, that becomes your deeper question. So what? I can get down to that really core topic of what they're talking about. Because a lot of times within situations, especially within corporate, we tend to talk surface level because we're afraid to let anybody in. Because if anybody gets into our bubble, we're now at basically this idea that we're at war and we're trying to protect ourselves. And this is why leadership has to be trustworthy. They have to be somebody that you would go to. There has to be that open communication because the more we can create that within our culture, the more we can have people that are telling us these things that they're doing outside of work that are helpful to the work that they're doing. Now, obviously, we don't want to use this for evil because just like anything, this is very much that Spider-Man thing. With great power comes great responsibility. And so when people are telling you these things that they're passionate about, that they like doing, not using those against them, using them to help them. I have a dear friend who was telling me about a leader within his organization that has only promoted in the over 10 years that he's been at this organization, only promoted 2 people. And that's not something that you should be saying as a leader yes, I've only promoted 2 people. Your job as a leader and as somebody who is leading other people is to promote them to the next thing. I should know as a leader, what are the desires that my team want for themselves specifically? What are the things that I can help them towards that get them to that next position? Because moving people forward is what's going to help them have buy-in for what they're doing with you now. So, what are those questions that you're asking? Not how is the project? How are you with the project? The next thing is remember and return to it. If someone mentions their kid's tournament, you ask next week, you ask them how they're doing, if their parent gets sick. Remembering things about people, even if you're like, have a hard time with this. I don't remember things about people. Having a little file for yourself. Like if you do what we call the hot girl walk, which is where you go around the office and you have conversations with the people in your office. Now, when they tell me something, even if I'm like, oh, I'm not going to remember that, I will keep a little note in my phone. Pick those couple of people within your team that you're managing and go, okay, here's the things that they told me. Yeah, I'm going to remember that they always talk about their daughter whose name is Sue and that she just graduated from kindergarten and all of these little things along the way. And then I can bring those back up and have that connection. And the more you do that, the more you're going to remember those things. This is just a muscle. We just have to practice and use this muscle in order to keep that memory still coming. And then in 6 months from now, you'll be doing this and you'll go, oh, yeah, I totally remember those things that you know, Bill told me about his daughter. The final thing is keep the connection. It does not require a lot of time. It requires intention. Connection requires intention. So the outcome we're really trying to get to is not that people like you more. Will they like you more because of this? Probably. But the outcome that we're looking for is that your name travels into rooms you have never entered because people who feel seen advocate for the people who saw them. So just like you as the leader or you as the listener are advocating for somebody to get a promotion or advocating for your name to be in a room that you're not in, these are things that work within an ecosystem. So if I'm a leader and I never promote anybody, why would the team that I have ever tell me anything of value? Because they're not getting anything out of it. This is very common sense things that we don't use within our leadership. The same thing is true for people who are working for you. Why would I promote you if I'm not getting more information from you? So do you see how they have to work together for the ecosystem to work well? So your name travels furthest through the people who felt most seen by you. So, how do you, as the person, be the domino that sees people in order for you to be seen? And we have to bring in some of these nerdy pieces of science here too, because Amy Edmondson's research on Psychological safety at Harvard Business School shows that people perform at their highest level when they feel safe enough to be honest, safe enough to say, I don't know, I need help, I made a mistake. But psychological safety does not come from ping pong tables and flexible Fridays or that pizza party that you decide to have. It comes from the repeated experience of a leader paying attention and responding with curiosity instead of judgment. Every time a manager really sees someone and responds well, they deposit into the psychological safety account. And every time they miss the person entirely, they make a withdrawal. And if you want to think about this from a money perspective, think about how many leaders in your organization, and I'm sure that you have them coming to mind, have a negative balance with people, have a negative balance with your team. If you're not in leadership, I'm sure that you can tell me who has a negative balance with you, who you're like, no, if they asked me to do something, I wouldn't do that. If they wanted me to go the extra mile, I won't do that. If they put another thing on my plate, that's not what I would actually go and do. So those are things to be thinking about, whether you're on the leadership side or you're on the high performer or the person looking to get into leadership side. Because psychological safety is not a culture initiative. It's not something that you can just inject to be like, we are a safe environment. You can't just say it with words. It is a daily deposit. It's showing up consistently, like we were just talking about, and showing that that's something that's really actually important to your organization, to your team. Because this is not something that we can just put on a board, paint on the wall, have people sing Kumbaya around, and hope to God that it's going to end up being part of our culture, because that's just not how culture works. And that daily deposit is not something that is trained in one session. It is worked on over time, which is why I work with leaders long term in a membership type model after we do some kind of training in the Aligned Leadership Lab. So that training and development stick long term. We're not just saying, hey, here's this thing, we checked off the box, we did the training. We're saying, hey, we did the training, or we're coming into the membership and we're going every week and having some things that we're doing in bits and pieces so that we see these changes happen long term. And here's what I want you to walk away with today. Engagement is not an HR metric. It is a reflection of how many people on your team feel actually seen by the person who leads them. The Gallup data makes it undeniable. The neuroscience makes it understandable. And the Spark method that we went over makes it doable starting today and starting this week. So the homework that I want you to do this week is to pick one person on your team you have worked with alongside for 6 months or more, but could not tell someone 3 real things about outside of their job performance. Go ahead, go have one 5-minute conversation with no agenda except them, just getting to know them, and ask one real question. And then remember what they say. That is where this starts. So thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Full Strength Leader. If this episode landed, share it with one leader you know who is doing the work, and subscribe wherever you listen, and come find me at KabrinaAshley.com. I will see you next week. That's a wrap on today's episode of Full Strength Leader. Take the lesson from today into your leadership this week and see what magic happens. If this episode hit home, I want to hear from you. Drop your questions, your reaction, or your biggest takeaway on Spotify in the comments under this episode. I read every single one, and your questions shape what we talk about next. And if you thought of someone during this show, do me a favor and share this episode with them. And don't forget to follow along so you never miss an episode. You can find me to connect and work with me directly at KabrinaAshley.com. Full Strength Leader starts here. We'll see you next week.